Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Indigenous people across the globe have used sacred plant medicines for millennia to heal, illuminate, and connect them to the web of life. From ayahuasca in San Pedro in South America, psilocybin mushrooms and Salvia divinorum in Mexico, peyote in North America, kambo in Brazil, iboga in Africa, and DMT acacias in Australia. Each of these psychoactive medicines needs a healer to connect them to their patients, and we have come to call such a healer the shaman. Our guest today is Rak Razam, host of the new documentary series entitled Shamans of the Global Village, which focuses on indigenous psychoactive medicines and the Western shamanic resurgence. He is a founder of Terra Incognita, a nonprofit dedicated to the scientific exploration of consciousness and spirituality, and the support of the sustainability of indigenous shamanic medicines. Rak is the author of a book entitled Aya Awakenings, a Shamanic Odyssey, which was featured on a previous Pathways episode. It's a travel memoir of his time with shamans in the Peruvian Amazon, and he also followed up with the ayahuasca sessions, conversations with Amazonian curanderos and Western shamans, which is a companion book. He wrote the screenplay for the documentary based on the memoir. His podcast, In a Perfect World, charts the meetings, musings, and collective dreamings of the ultra-culture of the 21st century. He hosts presentations, panel discussions, and lectures across Australia and North America that weave together New Age counterculture and progressive thought. Rak has been called one of the leading spokespersons for the new paradigm. Hello, Rak, and welcome to the Pathways Show.
Hello, Paulo. Thanks for having me.
Now, I didn't mention it in your bio, but I know that you came to a greater awareness of this whole tradition having to do with sacred medicines through your career as a journalist, and specifically on a mission to write an article about what was going on in Peru around ayahuasca for Penthouse Australia. That's right?
Yeah, so basically I started off as a freelance journalist, like a gonzo journalist, really. That's, looking at consciousness and spirituality and technology and things a bit to the left of the mainstream. But what's been really happening is that the mainstream's more and more been into these ideas. So when I first went down in 2006, I was looking at what this resurgence of interest in shamanism, specifically spearheaded by the ayahuasca movement in South America, and what the role of the shaman was and what it meant as an archetype in the 21st century. And so I went down to Peru and the jungles there, and, it was just to do a 3,000-word article, but that eventually, after about 3 months in the jungles, became a book, and the book was eventually turned into a documentary film. And as part of my journey down there, it was really looking at why are Westerners so interested in plant medicines and of the ritual and the ceremony that indigenous people have been caretakers for and have, given us back. And so there's such an interesting thing because ayahuasca has been compared. It's an indigenous plant medicine. Essentially, it's a brew which is made by the curanderos, the healers of the Amazon, containing the Banisteriopsis carpi vine with admixture plants containing DMT. Now, it can have some physical relief and can be a medicine on a purgative level and cleaning out the stomach bacteria and helping people, feel better. But essentially, the majority of the shamans that I talked to in the Amazon said that the bulk of Westerners going down there were going down because they did have a sickness, but it wasn't necessarily a physical one. It was more of a spiritual disconnect, of a feeling of not belonging, not knowing their purpose in the world. And, it was like a spiritual malaise. So one of the things which plant medicines like ayahuasca can really do is really help you get in touch with yourself. It's not that these things are like Western medicines that are like a pill that you take and the pill does all the work. In the indigenous understanding, they believe that, the medicines have a spirit in them. These plants that have an alive spirit ally in them, like Madre Ayahuasca, and that we engage in a relationship with them. And in that relationship, they help us work on our blockages and get to know ourselves. It's been described that ayahuasca is like 10 years of psychotherapy in one night. And it is a very powerful medicine. But number one, what it's really doing, I think, is helping people get back in touch with themselves, and also then to find their life's purpose and how they can contribute back into the world.
Now, it's been around for thousands of years in the jungles of the Amazon, and I take it that the indigenous peoples use it quite differently than as a tool for psychotherapeutic healing. What do they turn to it for?
Well, there's lots of academic and anthropological studies been done on this, and it's been evolving very rapidly because, as with most things, our contact with things changes things. So, Peru, for instance, which is one of the sort of tourist centers now of this wave of ayahuasca tourism and the spiritual pilgrims going down to the Amazon, they've had three major booms. There was the rubber boom at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. There was an oil boom in the mid-20th century. And now, essentially, there's an ayahuasca boom. And there's a lot of Western money going down to help set up lodge systems down there for pilgrims going down to seekers to experience ayahuasca. It's creating a lot of money, energy, power dynamics with indigenous peoples. But essentially, around the Amazon, ayahuasca was used as a purgative. It does clean out systems very effectively. And in some cultures, the shaman would drink ayahuasca on behalf of the patient. So ayahuasca does have this visionary component that the thing that the Westerners really want, they went down to the Amazon, in droves over the last 20 years looking for ayahuasca. But as well as this spiritual reconnection they were looking for, they wanted proof that there was a world beyond the senses. And in the West, that often entails to have a vision, to be a vision seeker and to see something. If you see it, it seems to be there's some sense of more tangibility to the experience. So ayahuasca, working in the neurochemical level, the ayahuasca vine acts as an MAO, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, to allow the DMT in the plant material of the brew to potentiate. Now, DMT is one of the most interesting chemicals in existence, really. It's very close to a neurotransmitter. It occurs all throughout nature. It's in the plant kingdom. It's in mammals. It's in the human brain. And, legal studies done in the 1990s point to the fact that dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which they've nicknamed the spirit molecule, it potentially is the thing which connects us in the dreaming every night to those realms that we can go to, as well as processing day residues. We may be going on some type of astral integration journey, but also at death, near death, and birth and peak experiences, the brain secretes a lot of DMT, and it creates the visionary state, a very powerful visionary state where you could be having not necessary hallucinations. In the Amazonian cosmovision and their worldview, they believe that everything is both connected and that there's larger energetic levels of reality that continue beyond the physical, and that's what part of the role of the shaman is to traverse those levels, to work on behalf of the mediation of energy or the health of his tribe. So it's a really big thing, but essentially I think, what we're discovering in the West, that both quantum physics and physicists and even environmentalists and many different people and many different levels are understanding that the Earth itself is alive. It's a whole single macroorganism with a web of interdependent species of which we are one. And that this time we're living in now, they're calling it the sixth great species extinction. It's a very crucial time if we're going to survive as a species, and also if the planet will survive. But so, what I believe is really happening is that they say the planet has a plan involving the plants, right? So what's happening is the planet has always been secreting or growing certain substances in concert to help mediate the other species. So psychoactive substances like ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms and San Pedro cactuses, and there's a multiplicity of shamanic sacred plant and animal materials that change consciousness all around the planet. And in those bioregions, they help mediate the species, i.e. man, but other animals sometimes indulge in these as well. And they're like chemical messengers, and they bring us back into a relationship with nature. And there's been many scientific studies done in the last 5 or 10 years looking at the role of how these substances work in the human brain. Mm-hmm. Essentially what they've discovered is with EEG and MRI studies that they switch off default mode network of the brain, like different regional clusters of the brain which help anchor the sense of ego and identity. And, we're actually more than we think we are. We're not just the intellect or the ego that's a a very valuable part of our intellectual or our mind makeup. But as many of the meditation sort of streams and lineages tell us, we're not just the ego. We're this greater reservoir of consciousness, and these materials that the indigenous people have been the caretakers for, they help reveal this, that we've forgotten.
Right.
We have these
Right.
full potentials within us. So there's so much to this movement of the what I call the global shamanic resurgence around the world, and of this reclamation of our full potential as human beings. It doesn't always have to be mediated by plant substances, but the thing is, we have had relationships, and you can look at the anthropological record for thousands of years with these type of materials, with shamanic materials like ayahuasca, like coca, like the mushrooms, which have been really intimately tied to the development of our consciousness and our survival as a species. And it's only because we are so calcified in our ego and our protective mechanisms that we see ourselves as separate from nature that we now have any judgment on the fact that we're weaving ourselves into nature and using these substances which nature produces. Like, this is something which we've done, I believe, for tens of thousands of years, if not longer. And now it's seeming to be coming full circle in reclaiming this shamanic lineage around the world.
I'm wondering why ayahuasca. I mean, we've had mushrooms and LSD and psychedelics for a long time, and many of us did major psychedelic journeys in the 70s, without the benefit of a shaman. I mean, is DMT, qualitatively different than psychedelic like psilocybin mushrooms?
Well, here we're getting into my other project, in a sense, which is the Terra Incognita project. So after first going down to the Amazon in 2006 and exploring what this archetype of the shaman was, and writing about the ayahuasca movement, and then becoming a commentator and a thought leader, I guess, within the Western movement of that, and reporting at conferences and doing podcasts and discussions, what I really recognized was that there was a very large percentage of people staying in the shamanic movement and going back to their towns and cities in the West. And there was people stepping forth into the roles of facilitators of these medicines and caretakers of these medicines, just as there was in indigenous villages in the first world. So I started to see this growth vector of what I call these shamans of the global village, is that we are a global village. We're all these nodes in a network around the world, and these medicines are coming to the fore, and also in a direct sort of counterpoint to the Western big pharma model of drugs, which really just mask the symptoms so often. I mean, the Western medical system has produced an amazing cornucopia of substances which can be very effective. But the indigenous understanding of what medicine is and what health is very different from the Western one. They understand that it's all about right relationship, and that dis-ease means that you're not in unity somewhere in your makeup. They believe that we have an energetic body, an emotional body, and then a physical body, and the physical body is the port of last call where sickness manifests. So a lot of the work with plant medicines isn't just the neurological basis. It's using the neurological basis to activate the energetic basis, where they can look in and see and work on an energy body, etc., etc. So, in the West, our idea of medicine is even different. So with the tryptamines, especially the DMT that's in the ayahuasca brew and is all throughout nature, it's very close to a neurotransmitter. It's in the plant kingdom, it's in mammals in the animal kingdom, and it's in our own human brains. So this growth of global shamanic culture, largely spearheaded in the last decade or so by ayahuasca, which is now all over the mainstream media, like Lindsay Lohan did ayahuasca about 2 years ago and tweeted to 8 million of her followers. Time magazine, every major periodical, Marie Claire, everyone has been reporting on ayahuasca, because you know what? It works. It works not because it's like a red pill you take that's made by a pharmacological model. It works because it reveals the traumas, the hurts, the things which you need to clear within your psychological, energetic makeup. And it doesn't just do it for you. It reveals what you've been holding on to for you to release. And in that process and that relationship you have with ayahuasca, that's where the real healing can begin. It can reveal your medicine within. So to come back to the tryptamines, the interesting thing is there's this global shamanic culture in the West, and it's very, very popular. And it's not just in a demographic, let's say it was in the 60s with youth culture. Ayahuasca and medicine culture is not recreational. It's hard work. You have to face yourself. You have to face your fears and your weaknesses and find your strengths within. And these medicines reveal that. They basically connect you to the universe at large. They open the bandwidth of your consciousness. As I mentioned before, they work on the default mode networks of the brain. They switch those off. And then when those egoic states are switched off, the full spectrum consciousness of our human potential is allowed to be back on and to connect to the web of life and to receive more information, which is always being broadcast. Now, tryptamines are very, very central to this. They're very central to consciousness itself. So in my time working with ayahuasca for about 7 or 8 years on the book and what became the film, Aya Awakenings, and seeing this global shamanic resurgence, then I started to develop this idea for Shamans of the Global Village, my new documentary project. And coincidentally enough, I met this Mexican doctor called Dr. Octavio Rettig, who works with the Sonoran Desert toad, which is a toad that's indigenous to the Sonoran Desert in Mexico and across into Arizona in the States. And it goes underground for 9 months of the year. And in the darkness, in its venom sacs, where it produces bufotenine, but also 5-MeO-DMT, which is a bit different from the NN-DMT, but is still a DMT and a tryptamine, which also occurs in our human brain. So here's the really interesting thing is, and this is in episode 1 of Shamans of the Global Village, but I started to work very closely with tryptamines, and then I formed the organization, the Terra Incognita Project.org, to help anchor the scientific understanding of what's happening with tryptamines, especially in these shamanic medicines when we take them, and what happens endogenously in our human brain with tryptamines itself. Because NN-DMT can bring on an incredibly profound visionary experience where you may be seeing, geometries and geodesic patternings and potentially even entities on an astral level, or direct visionary externalizations of internal processes and helping you work out your relationships and traumas and things like that. But the visions are so real and so profound that they're like real life, essentially. And so they're affecting you on a psychological level. Now, 5-MeO-DMT, which is a different tryptamine in the tryptamine cascade, that is essentially what mystics throughout history have described as the white light, the oceanic rejoining of source consciousness. It's a very profound mystic experience. Now, science has been studying this tryptamine of 5-MeO-DMT, and it is in some plant materials that some tribes in Ecuador and Colombia use in their ayahuasca brews, which they call yahe. But one of the most potent forms of 5-MeO-DMT is what's been resurfacing in the Sonoran Desert toad, or the Bufo ovarius toad. And when that is dried and smoked, it engenders a full release, ego death, reunification with source consciousness. And I know these are just words and it sounds pretty out there, right? Yeah. But I mean, look at people throughout history. There was a book written over 100 years ago called Cosmic Consciousness by William Morris Buck, and he was one of the founders of modern psychotherapy. And he was measuring throughout history, and of course history is written by the victors, and what really gets into the history books. But he was mapping these experiences of people like, Gandhi and William Blake and Jesus and Mohammed and Moses, people that have had mystic visionary experiences, usually in the olden days encapsulated within a religious paradigm. But religion's almost like the artifact which comes after the spiritual contact experience, like the Gnostic spiritual experience itself. There's no middlemen, there's no priests, it's you and God, right? Essentially, there's the G word, the God thing. So people throughout time have had these experiences, and it seems to be in our capacity as humans, before we had electromagnetic frequencies and processed food and the stress of modern 20th century culture onwards, post-mechanization, post-industrialization, severing our connection with the natural world over the last few centuries, and our intimacy and our sensitivity to really read the signals that nature is giving us. We basically divorced Mother Nature 500 years or so ago, and it's all been downhill since then. Now, obviously, culture has created an amazing Well, there's an amazing technologies and amazing discoveries, and we know a lot more about what it is to be human. But in general, if you ask most people, I think in 21st century culture, I think we all feel that there's something wrong. Is that we're not necessarily in a sustainable culture. We seem to be at a tipping point and an ecological crisis, an ecological emergency, which is directly related to our disconnection from the planet, and to the fact that we don't have necessarily a practice or a sense of belonging, and we're fragmented and disconnected. And I believe that, when we talk about shamanism, there's trance, there's dance, there's tantra, there's breath work. All of these are incredibly powerful modalities to go within and to awaken your spiritual being, to reconnect you to yourself, to your community, and to the planet. And the plant medicines are also some of the most powerful catalysts we have for that journey. And if we even go back to the origins of some of the ancient cultures, like the Rig Vedas in the Buddhist tradition, who had the soma of antiquity, which was a psychoactive plant, or if we looked in Persia in the Middle East, where they had hayoma, which was the Syrian rue used to dye the carpets, and the legend of the magic carpets in the Sufi type traditions, they had acacias. There's plants which alter consciousness in all of these old traditions, all of the world religions, like all of them. If you really dig deep into the esoteric literature, including Christianity and other religions. But over time, we've lost this connection, and we've lost the connection with the planet and the plants and ourselves, and we've been left with the dogmas and the religions. So, the tryptamines are essential to this, and they're endogenous to our human brain, and they're natural. And so with training, with meditation, and with breath work, you can reveal these capacities within yourself. And with the value of plants and sacraments like the Buffet of Various Toad, which we focus on in episode 1 of Shamans of the Global Village, these are just incredibly powerful techniques of ecstasy, of shamanism itself. And that was the original definition of shamanism that Mercy Aliad coined in the 1950s, was that shamanism was the pursuit, the archaic techniques of ecstasy. And by that, they meant ecstasis. They meant the connection to the divine, not a pill you pop in a nightclub. It's ecstasis means it's your birthright. It's something we have within ourselves that somewhere over the course of history, we've had a degradation of our full capacity, what I consider our full spectrum, our bandwidth. We've gone from 5-bar signal down to 1 bar for the last few hundred, if not thousands of years of history. And it feels like it's coming full circle again. And through the relationship that we're anchoring and reweaving with the plants and the planet, and with ceremony itself and indigenous cultures, and this sacralization, re-tribalization, and re-shamanization of the world, it's like we're starting to realize life is a ceremony, life is a gift, life is alive and full of spirit.
Hey, now, why do we need to take toad medicine or even ayahuasca for the DMT experience if it's already in our brain? And what's the mechanism? What's going on?
You know what? When you get a car and your battery runs down and it goes flat, and the car's fully fine, it has this potential within itself to run, but it just needs a kickstart. Someone needs to hotwire your car and get it started again. Because we've had 10,000 years of history, which have been increasing declensions of consciousness, like we've been filtering out and out and out. Essentially what I believe happened, and there's authors like Graham Hancock who have been exploring the historical and anthropological record of ancient civilizations, and there's a lot of evidence there that history is older than we think it is. But essentially something happened to us about 12,000 years ago. They think it was a meteor or a comet impact, and there was a physical impact. But as the world's religions and holy books and the myth maps still tell us, in many different cultures, there was also a corresponding fall from grace, from unity consciousness. Something shifted in our consciousness. So what I believe is that, there was a physical event, and there was also something that happened with consciousness where we basically, I feel like we have species PTSD, and we have this armoring, and all of culture is perhaps a repercussion to this fall from consciousness and grace. And we've distanced from nature, and then we started taking from nature and creating all the hierarchies and cities and nation states, and the ego's been there to protect us from our disconnection. And now nature's been going at the apex of our disconnection, when we're living through the 6th great species extinction, and the ice caps are melting and everything's hitting the fan because we haven't learned how to live in Mother Earth anymore.
Right.
We're living in a way which is polluting the environment.
Right.
And it's not separate from us. We see it as separate because we've had many thousands of years of ego identification with individuation. But nature is built in through the tryptamines, this ability for us to reconnect. And I think the plants and the toad is just helping kickstart that remembrance.
Okay, that's fantastic. I mean, we could talk for so long about this. It's just fascinating, and you are such a font of knowledge, and I'm really glad that you are doing documentaries, and we don't have much time left here on Pathways. Tell our listeners how they can get access to your documentaries, because you got a whole series of them planned, and also how they can support Terra Incognita, which is a tax-deductible nonprofit. You've got 30 seconds.
Thank you. So www.shamansoftheglobalvillage.com is where you can download episode 1, which is looking at Octavio Redig and the Sonoran Desert Toad. And they say it takes a tribe to raise a child, and it takes a tribe to support a documentary series. We're planning 13 episodes across the world. And www.terra-incognita-project.org is the 501c3 not-for-profit where we're doing conservation work, protecting the toad in the Sonoran Desert, preservation work, looking at how 5-MeO can be nurtured into the community. 5-MeO-DMT is legal in Mexico and Canada. It's only illegal in 7 countries around the world. We're auspicing a lot of scientific studies looking at what happens in consciousness itself, which is so fascinating. We're getting a whole new revolutionary models of consciousness through EEG monitoring of people before and after the toad. People go into gamma state of frequency for extended periods, which is unity consciousness. And we have the technology now with neuroscience, with shamanism, to combine into what I call neuroshamanism. And please, we really need your support to help fund some of those cutting-edge studies we're doing with the Terra Incognita project.
Well, I certainly encourage and hope that some of our listeners step up and maybe make a contribution, if only by getting the documentary. I thought Aya Awakenings was fantastic. It was even psychedelic. It was beautiful. And I understand your documentary series is going to be on Gaiam TV. So there are ways for people to get access to this content. But we've got to go now. I just want to repeat your website about the documentary, shamansoftheglobalvillage.com. And
that's the one.
And thanks a lot, Rak. And for those who tuned in late, this is your Pathways host, Paul O'Brien, author of Great Decisions, Perfect Timing, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. In a second, I'll tell you how you can rewind and replay this interview anytime you like, via the internet or as a free podcast. Just search for Pathways or Paul O'Brien, and you will find it on iTunes or the Android servers, as well as on divination.com. Today we've been visiting with Rak Razam, host of Shamans of the Global Village, Aya Awakenings, founder of Terra Incognita, a nonprofit that needs support. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to the Pathways program, which is broadcast and streamed worldwide via KBOO.FM Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. USA Pacific Time. Podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's spelled D-I-V-I, nation.com, as well as via iTunes and other podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien, reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Rak Razam and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways experience.